I'm going to talk today about Metallica because they're my favorite band, and I'm going to go into a little detail about the discography, what it means to me, and some of the history of the band, and share some of my experiences in seeing them over the years. So, the band started back in 1981 in Los Angeles. It was James Hetfield singing, playing guitar, Lars Ulrich on drums, Ron McGovney, who I believe was James Hetfield's roommate at the time, on bass, and Dave Mustaine as their original guitar player. In 1982, Metallica produced a independent cassette-only EP by the name of No Life to Leather, which attracted a lot of attention. In early 1983, Trauma bass player Cliff Burton joined the band, replacing Ron McGovney, and the band relocated to San Francisco, which was Cliff's hometown. They had attracted the attention of record producer John Zazula from Megaforce Records, and they had also done a song for Brian Slagel's compilation record by the name of Hit the Lights, and Brian Slagel was the founder of Metal Blade Records. So with this little catalog of songs out there, Metallica went into the studios with Megaforce to put out their first album, which was going to be called Metal Up Your Ass in 1983. Megaforce didn't like that name, so the band changed the title to Kill 'Em All. After some infighting in the band, Dave Mustaine was dismissed and replaced by Exodus guitarist Kirk Hammett in 1983. Kill 'Em All was released, and Kill 'Em All was the band's debut album. It also has the distinction of being the only Metallica album that featured songwriting contributions from James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich, Dave Mustaine, and Cliff Burton. Kirk Hammett filled in the solos, but didn't actually have a chance to compose most of the material with the band. A year later, in 1984, the band put out their second record, Ride the Lightning, which was a unique album because it was the first album that Metallica did that actually got included in their Elektra Records catalog. They were signed to Elektra in 1985, and they re-released Ride the Lightning, and this album had the distinction of having the unique songwriting contributions from James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich, Cliff Burton, Kirk Hammett, and Dave Mustaine, who co-wrote the title track, Ride the Lightning, and the closing instrumental, The Call of Cthulhu. That was the last album that Mustaine had any contributions in, and his mark was left on Metallica, and his harsh departure from the band was something of many conversations in years to come. The band's third record, Master of Puppets, which was recorded at Sweet Silence Studios in Copenhagen, Denmark, Lars Ulrich's hometown, the same location as Ride the Lightning had been recorded. It was done during the fall of 1985. It was released in March of 1986, also on Elektra Records. And this album had the distinction of both being the only album that featured songwriting contributions from James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich, Cliff Burton, and Kirk Hammett, but it was also the last album that featured Cliff Burton in the band. He unfortunately passed away in September of 1986 in Sweden while the band was on tour. In the fall of that year, they auditioned Flotsam and Jetsam bassist Jason Newsted, who joined the band, and they released a EP called the 598 EP Garage Days Re-Revisited, which was 5 cover songs recorded in James and Lars's basement at the home they lived in the Bay Area at the time. And it came out in 1987, and it was something to keep the fans going, to let them know the band was still recording new music and at least working on playing together. In 1988, they actually released new music on Injustice for All, and they did their first music video for the song One, which came out in 1989. It was nominated for an MTV Video Music Award and I think a Grammy. It didn't win. I know Jethro Tull beat them, oddly, for the best heavy metal performance, but the band would come back in 1991 with their 5th self-titled album, dubbed the Black Album, that had 5 hits. It had Enter Sandman, The Unforgiven, Nothing Else Matters, Wherever I May Roam, Sad But True, and it's a classic to this day. The band did a box set, their first live album, which was called Live Shit, Binge and Purge in 1993, from San Diego, Seattle, and Mexico City over the course of the Injustice for All and Black album tours, and it featured some really great shredding, plus an 18.5-minute jam session instrumental. The band took a big change after that. In 1996, they came out with Load, and it was a more rock-oriented, kind of trippy sounding set of songs. Bob Rock had been working with the band since 1990 on the Black Album, and he was still producing this album with them. 1995, 1996, they recorded the material that came out on Load. And throughout 1995, 96, and early 1997, they worked on the content that became Reload, the follow-up to that album, which was released in November of 1997. There were a lot of singles. I mean, there was Until It Sleeps, Hero of the Day, King Nothing, Mama Said, Fuel, The Memory Remains, which had Marianne Faithfull on vocals, The Unforgiven 2, Better Than You. There were a lot of singles on these albums, but the content, as Metallica would admit later, was just kind of forced together. They tried to come up with song ideas, and then they made something out of it. And it wasn't traditional Metallica sounding content. In 1998, the band did a double album called Garage Inc. 27 songs, all cover songs. The first disc was a set of new stuff. The second disc was old stuff that was mostly B-sides, including the original Garage Days EP that had come out back in 87. And in 1999, Metallica did the infamous S&M with Michael Kamen conducting the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra in April of 1999, and it was a great set of songs. The band did a song called I Disappear in 2000 that was on the Mission Impossible 2 soundtrack, and unknown to a lot of the fans, Bob Rock, their producer at the time, actually did the bass on that recording because bassist Jason Newsted at the time only showed up a couple of days ahead of pre-production and was not available to actually lay down the bass tracks. That tumult kind of carried on throughout the next year because the band ended up losing Jason in early 2001 and spent the next couple of years focusing on allowing James to focus on some of his personal issues, going to rehabilitation and trying to kind of find that work-life balance within his family and within the band. And then the band continued auditioning bass players, and Pepper Keenan was there, and Scott Reeder, and Twiggy Ramirez, and a bunch of pretty cool rocking bass players auditioned for the band. But Robert Trujillo obviously made the cut. He was just outstanding, and the band notoriously said that they felt like they were playing with Cliff again when Rob was in the band, so they knew he had to be part of that. So in 2003, in June of 2003, Saint Anger came out. Even though Bob Rock actually did the bass tracks on the album, because Rob was in the band, he was credited as being the bass player. I had the pleasure of seeing Metallica play on the first night of a fans-only gig in San Francisco at the Fillmore, May 18th of 2003, ahead of the release of Saint Anger, one of the first shows they did with Rob, and they destroyed. They played all 80s era Metallica. They did Sad But True, and I think Frantic was the only new song they did in that show at the time, and it just was unbelievable. And some of the footage of that is on the Some Kind of Monster DVD in the bonus scenes, so check that out. I think you can actually see me and my friend Wayne waving at the camera at one point. And the band eventually started working with Rick Rubin. They joined Warner Brothers Records and put out Death Magnetic in 2008, which was no question a return to the early thrash-inspired Metallica with songs like The Day That Never Comes and All Nightmare Long. It was really heavy. I saw this tour. I was blown away by their energy, how revitalized they were, how solid the songs were. They did an EP called Beyond Magnetic in 2011 that had a few songs that had come from those recording sessions but were later re-released. They did a concept album with Lou Reed called Lulu that same year, which was based on a 19th century German opera, and it was pretty crazy. The View was kind of like the single from that. And if you've heard it, it's not typical Metallica, but it is definitely cool because they're doing their thing and they're experimenting. The band came back in 2016 with a double album. Some versions of it were a triple album, Hardwired to Self-Destruct. And it's probably the band's most solid effort to date. I think they're always evolving. They melded some of the stuff they did in the 80s, the thrashier, faster stuff, some of the stuff they did in the 90s that was more solid pop, and some of the stuff they had done in the 21st century, which was just more cutting edge and more progressive, to make a really, really great album. So that's my summation of Metallica. I've probably seen them live 10 times or more. I've seen them in most U.S. states, and I really can't tell you how much I look forward to seeing them play live again in America or any other country when COVID is over. So stay tuned for more album discography reviews. Thank you.